This will be our second chief debate held in Flat Bay. Tonight we have with us two running candidates for the chief position of Alipu, Mr. Clyde Russell and Mr. Hayward Young.
I'm Hayward Young, born and raised in Stephenville Crossing. Worked in this community for nearly 20 years, probably a little more. My first recollection of coming to Flat Bay was in the back seat of a 1954 sedan with my parents and a couple of siblings that picked blueberries in journals. And that was my first recollection. The next time I came here to work and has been mentored by Calvin White and still being mentored by Calvin White. And he identified, I was 28 years old, finally found out I had Aboriginal ancestry, had some hints before with big connections with Wibb families, Benoits, you name it, Whites, big connection here in Flat Bay that I really didn't know about until I came here. Calvin showed me an old map where it said Young's Cove just down below the powwow grounds, where Walter Legge and Donnie Alexander fished for years. And it was called Young's Cove, named after my great-grandfather. And I've been told too that the powwow grounds was lived on by my great-grandfather too. So I've got a big connection to the community. And I don't ask you for your vote. I ask you to get out and vote. This is my third time I've met Clyde. He's a perfect gentleman. We've shared stuff. He's a good guy. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here in Flat Bay. I know that this is a special place. It's a special place in the culture and history of the Mi'kmaq people here in Bay St. George. And I want to particularly acknowledge the presence of Elder Calvin White, a man who spent a lot of his lifetime, fighting for the rights of the people. And I have the greatest admiration and respect for the people who have done that here and elsewhere. So now I just, and also I want to thank Chief Lasaga for the invitation to be here today. Now I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I have some connection to this community as well. One of my granduncles lived here almost his entire life. And my grandfather, as a young man, trapped here between Journos and Red Indian Lake some almost 100 years ago. And my family is also connected to the Strides and the Louvels. My grandmother's sister, both sisters married into the Stride and Louvelle family. So and when I grew up in Kippens and spent a lot of time on the land as a young man. And what I learned there from my parents and my grandparents served me well later in my military career. And I just want to say that in my military career, I had the great honor and privilege to serve with some outstanding Mi'kmaq warriors from this area. Men like Malcolm Bennett, which I met his sister here a while ago. Ron Pirway, Leo Young, just to name a few. But men who stood out. I can tell you, men who stood out among men. And I was very honored and privileged to have that opportunity. I came back to retire after a long military career. I spent 33 years in the regular force. I was an infantry and special operations commander. I retired at the rank of full colonel and came back home to retire with my lovely wife Elsie in 2009. And we've been living in the Stephenville area since then. Elsie had a serious medical issue the first year, so we had to deal with that. And after that, I became engaged in my community and working abroad, where I still work in the military side of the house as a contractor. So that's kind of my story. How did I get involved in this selection campaign? I had a lot of people approach me, and they approached me because they said, we need leadership. We need leadership now. Our enrollment process is in a mess. People are divided, families are divided, communities are divided, and we need strong leadership to try to get our people back on track. So after a lot of convincing and soul searching, because it was a big decision for me to make to go back into public life and to put my family through that again, I decided to do it and to serve the people.
We got to give the power back to you people. We don't. I've been to different communities. The main things they talk about now is basically the supplemental agreement is a big issue, and communication. And we're not getting any feedback on any of that. We're just not getting any communication at all. The media usually finds out things before we do. So that's why I'm basically running, and I'm running because of my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, long after I'm gone. Because this is what this was about right from the start. It was about the 7 generations. And we have a lot of people out there that preach the seven generations now, but still we're in a state now where it seems like we're only concerned about this generation. And I feel that's not right. And we have to move ahead, and it's going to take time, it's going to take work to unite this man, because it's fractured big time. Fractured because of the supplemental agreement, and fractured because we haven't had the leadership that will pull us together as a nation.
I just want to talk now about the future, about the vision for the future. And, where we are today. I personally don't know the full extent of the mess we're in, because it's probably only people behind closed doors in the Health Blue office that really know what, the situation and how we can proceed from there. But I made a couple of things clear. Number one, I will not stand against the people in court or anywhere else. There's a number of court cases that are underway, and they will take their time moving through the system. And they may show us the way. I'm not sure. It may come from there, but I will not stand against the people. The other thing I'd say is that one of the first things like I would be looking at would be assembling a legal team to start looking at options on how we can go forward, because we have to get over this mess that we're in here. Okay, everywhere I go, this is the first question the people bring to my attention, bar none. So it's the most important issue facing whoever gets elected. My idea for the future is a level of self-determination for our people that meets the aspirations of the people, right? It's how far we want to go. And I don't think we need to, I think we should be looking at ourselves as no more or no less than any other First Nation across Canada. And that's kind of my idea of our future vision. And when I talk about a vision, I'm talking about, I got to read it here a little bit so I don't forget the words, but a proud, prosperous, and caring First Nations people with a vibrant and visible culture. Okay? And that's kind of the long-term kind of idea where probably we need to go. But the people are going to give me the vision, or the words to put in the vision, because I want everybody to have ownership of it. There's a number of paths that'll lead us to the vision. And, the enrollment thing is one of them. As a level of self-determination, probably we should have control of our own enrollment process, like many First Nations do. And we shouldn't be afraid of it. And we shouldn't, blame it on the government or give it all to them. We should be in charge of our own destiny, not the federal government or anybody else. So that's kind of where I think. We need to move along the path of our language and culture. Very, very important. This is what unites the people. Culture unites the people. And, you know, as you heard from my colleague here, we are fractured, and I certainly agree with him. Morale is low in a number of areas. We're not united. And in order to get something done, like something big done, you're either going to get it from the courts, or you're going to get it from political will. And you know, you have to be a united political force to get those hard things done. You know, federal election coming up in 2019. So you know, I would urge all of you to unite as a political force to get the things that we really need for our people right now. Economic development, that's another avenue that we need to go down. Natural resources and conservation. You know, our use of the land has to be coupled with our care of the land. That is extremely important. The land is like a critical part of who we are. Accountability and transparency. I got that on my list of things to do. And it's really important that we be accountable and transparent, not just within our organization, the Halapu First Nation, but also outside, outlooking, and to the public at large, to the federal government. Okay, transparency and accountability gives us credibility, right? And that's what we need. That's really important. And the final thing I got here, and there's a few other things like governance, but communications that Hayward already touched on, really, really important. Right now, there's a lot of people left out of the communications loop. You know, a lot of senior citizens they don't have access to the internet. They can't get on the web page. They're left behind. So we have to find a way to communicate with all our people. And that's a factor that will unite all our people, right? The same as culture. Communication is critically important so that people understand what's happening. You know, right now there's a lot of holes and a lot of gaps in information coming out, and those gaps have to be filled so that the people know and understand what we're doing at the higher levels. So that's as far as I'm going to go. I can expand on any of these. And I look forward to meeting all of you and taking your questions here this afternoon. Thank you.
Mr. Russell spoke on the land resources and Mother Nature. Well, I kind of got an impression of the Halapu band that's presently in place and what their ideas or whatever is about the land. Because in the community where I live out in Zook Branch, we had a company from Nova Scotia come in and tear Mother Nature to pieces. A knob that I used to sit on and look over a little bog where I shot my moose many times. When I went in this year, that little knoll was gone. You can't sit on it anymore. They got it pushed out over the bog. That's what they done with it when they put their new tower up and made their road. They left it like that. They tore up a lot of our access roads, and they left them torn up. And a lot of them are over private land too. So my question was to the natural resources guy who was at the Assembly of First Nations, was what can be done about it, and where was your position when this was being done? Well, we didn't have much to say about it. It was mostly the government that had to say about what was done, what needed to be repaired, and what didn't need to be repaired. So, is that the position the Mi'kmaq people should be taking, to tell the government that they're allowed to come out and send somebody out to tear our land to help and tear up our hunting grounds? That's what they done. And they left it like that. So a few people complained and they came back out and they fixed up a little bit, but there's still a bad mess out there. I mean, a really bad mess. And you're talking about communications. Well, when I was a member of the Halapu band, I communicated, one of the first ones to communicate. I called Alison White and somebody told me who to call, and she sent me a newsletter every year. You know, every year, every month. I didn't get 1 point for communications, not one. They got the story she wrote on me up there in their office. They're not planning on doing nothing about it. They said that nothing can be done. That the appeal master's decision, final, wrote in gold. But still, they will tell me in Winnipeg that you're well within your rights to be doing what you're doing because you were fell through the cracks. Now, the lady who told me that, I don't know if she will repeat it, but she fell through the cracks. So I said, I think it's time for somebody to close up the cracks and put the people back in who fell through the cracks. So, before anybody votes in this election, you should take a long, hard look at the candidate. See, the people like me, I can't vote, but my family is torn up and they can vote. So, if they vote properly, they can make changes that will make a difference. And when I was in for an Assembly of the First Nations meeting, I spoke on what a wonderful job they were doing as a corporation, the Halibo Band. Wonderful job. They're doing a wonderful job, not excellent, but a wonderful job with culture. They're doing a good job with culture. But when it comes to unity, they're gone. It's lost. Unity is lost in this man. You've got people in your family who want to talk to you, something wrong. If you're a Mi'kmaq and you want to talk to me, something wrong. You know, we're supposed to be united. We're supposed to be a peaceful people. We're supposed to help one another. So that's what people need to think about when they go to this election. Who is responsible for throwing the people in? Who is responsible for the enrollment process that was put in place after I was a founding member that threw me out? All the stuff that was done negative in the band. You can't sit there and say we've got to be positive when you're doing negative things. That don't work. So that's my experience, and I'm still hoping and fighting that one day I will get back my status card, but it's not going to change how I feel. Never will change how I feel. But the decision was made. You signed the agreement. You're out. You got signed out. Case closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a lot of information, a lot of good information, and basically I think there was a ruling in the last few days that basically shut down us as Aboriginal groups to be consulted before they do anything around, like whether it's putting transmission line through or anything else. And I know Bobby has spoke on this before about cleaning up after they put the transmission line across here. And they've started to do it. I've seen some of it being done, but they will never bring it back to where it was. Never. And what I'm saying is, like, they got to consult with us right from day one. Don't come to us after it's done, or after they make a decision they're going to put a transmission line across hunting grounds or trapping grounds or anything else. They have to consult with us. Now we've been told that they don't have to consult with us. So it's going to be whoever is chief and council, they have to come together, and I mean come together not only with our band, but with the Grand Council, the Assembly of First Nations, which is one of the biggest lobbying groups for, well, the biggest lobbying group for our people in Canada. We got to have a united effort. And if we don't get there, and if we're not part of it right from the beginning, we need to do something about it. And I'm not beyond civil disobedience. If it needs to be done, if we need to block a highway, we'll block a highway. I think that needs to be done. And I want to make something clear before I give my partner here a chance to speak. But at the debate a few nights ago, it was inferred that I was a negotiator, a full negotiator, during the negotiations of the AIP. I want people to know, and it says right there in the book, they never read the fine print, but I was an observer, and that's all I was. You won't find my signature on any AIP, any supplemental agreement. I voted against the AIP actually because I didn't think it was a good agreement for us. First thing, I had no land, and what we ended up with was basically fell way short of what we had. We had no hunting and fishing. We should have nothing less than our brothers and sisters have on the mainland. And when I speak about hunting and fishing, yes, it needs to be under our conservation. We need to be the people that narrate anything that's about our people. We should be the ones that making the decision, like self-determination and anything else. And I agree, something needs to be done. And we got a long way to go, and the courts may settle some of it. But we gotta have a united front. Our people got to lead us. We can have who we want as chief, but our direction come from you people. And if we don't have that, we got nothing. Thank you very much.
First of all, just to discuss a little bit about conservation and where we should stand, on these industrial development projects that impact our lands. I firmly believe that we need to have a presence and standing at when there's any discussion about industrial development in our areas that might affect our way of life. And that's standing at any environmental assessment hearings or any public meetings that have to discuss that. I don't know, the exact details of the case that he spoke about, but I do know that Halibu had received funding from Emira to put this transmission line through Western Newfoundland. And, this company should have been held accountable to fix any problems or mess that they made. And we shouldn't stand for people coming through our lands and tearing up our berry picking patches and hunting areas and stuff like that. Okay, we should protect our way of life, and regardless of what it is, because these companies will play both ends against the middle. It'll be a lot of talk about jobs and economy, no talk about the environment and the way of life for the people. So there's a fine balance to be struck. And when you're talking about fracking, transmission lines, wind towers, and all kinds of stuff like this, these are things that can destroy or damage the way of life that you enjoy right now. So my position on that is a strong one. I would definitely be front and center at any hearings that may take place, and to protect the rights of our people. The other part about it is that the federal government recent Supreme Court ruling had to do with legislation. It had to do with the requirement for the government to consult Aboriginal people when drafting legislation. It wasn't particularly about consulting when it comes to projects in our lands or in our territories and things like that. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Our Prime Minister has made a lot of promises when it comes to consulting with Aboriginal people, but I hazard to say that across Canada there's not a whole lot of Aboriginal leaders that are happy so far with what we've seen coming out of it. So this legislation had to do with this ruling had to do with legislation, but the government still has a duty to consult Aboriginal people for industrial development in their lands. And we'll make sure that anything that comes down the pipe like that will be carefully scrutinized from our point of view. The enrollment process, I think this man here, like many people I've met in this election campaign, has expressed it very well. It's a really difficult issue. It's a complex issue. It will not be solved easily. And I'd hazard to say that it's not going to be like individual cases that are going to have to be solved. It's going to be a group action that's going to have to solve chunks of it at a time to get this straightened out. That's kind of like what I see. And again, this is going to take a lot of smart legal work and a lot of hard work to get it done. But, you know, if I'm elected chief, I will be the chief for all of the people. Not just some of the people, all of the people. And we know who our people are, right? We know who they are. We don't need the government to tell us who they are. All right? Thank you.
I'll ask both candidates here, if you become chief, will you allow me, as a non-status member of the Halapoop band, kicked out, to attend your band functions such as meetings, even if you don't let me have any say? Let me attend and see what's going on. I ask you both that question.
Yeah, I see.
Well, you want to ask me for a card at the door and say your card is no good, you can't come in here, you're not allowed in, which today I really appreciate you letting me in here, because I understand they could have said you can't come in here because you don't have a card, right? You know, it's null and void right now. But just to have that privilege, like when I go to the powwow in Flat Bay, nobody asks me for a card. That's my cultural right to be able to go there and go to the sweat lodge and talk to the people around there who I've known for years, all in this area. And all the breaks that go there, all my relatives, every one of them, first cousin basis, all my as brothers and sisters' kids. And I want to be able to do that. And if there's a band meeting, I show up at the door, I don't want to be told you can't come in, you got no card. So I'm asking you here before those people, so you can be held to it. Will you allow me to have that privilege?
I will.
Will you?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of clarifications that I think will be important, not only for the people that are here, but would be very important for the candidates. With regard to the bands, if you have a local band council within your community, like Haywood just spoke about, yes, you can open your doors to meetings to those people. You can, any money that you raise, as long as that money don't come from Indian Affairs. When you're a registered status band, any money that you acquire from Indian Affairs upon contract for distribution, you are not allowed to spend that money on non-status Indians. If you do, you are violating your contracts, the band will be held accountable, and you will have to pay that money back. So that needs to be clear. With regard to attending meetings, as much as I feel for you, my brother, if it's a status band, you have to have a valid status card in order to enter that room. Unless the delegation there decides that yes, we'll let you in, but you do not have the privilege to ask questions or to make comments. And that again is regulated by the Indian Act. So it's important to understand that. The other thing that people, and I'm seeing this all the time on Facebook, and people are talking about the right to self-determination, that any band can determine its own membership. Yes, you can. We all have that rule as people who belong to band councils. Under Section 10 of the Indian Act, any one of us can make rules with regard to our membership. But bear in mind, Section 10 of that membership rule, you are not entitled to any Indian Affairs funding. So therefore you get no money for education, you get no money for health care, you get no money for anything that comes from Indian Affairs. Section 10 is a general membership where a band can invite anybody that they want to belong to their band, to have a membership in that band, and they will give you a card. But it's not a status card like you have now, those of us who have a status card from Indian Affairs. So be very careful when people tell you we have the right to self-determination. Yes, we have the right to self-determination as long as you don't want anything else from it. If the only thing you want is a membership card, we can invoke Section 10 now in Hollyboo and make the 100,000 people on the island of Newfoundland Indians, but they will not be entitled to benefits from Indian Affairs. So you should understand that, you should know that, you need to familiarize yourself with the Act. Now my question is, how are you going to address the people who tell us that they're not Indians, but they have a card? But whenever you ask them, well, no, I just, what odds? If I can get something, why not take it? How are you going to address that? That's one question. Second question that I ask for you is, how do you determine when a person is still eligible for Indian status or membership? You know, I read just recently, somebody talked about going back 10 generations to find a great, that's only 9, one more 10, great grandmother who was an Indian woman who married an Indian man. And they've used that for their genealogy tree. How many times do you have to marry outside of your culture when you've assimilated? I want your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Elder White. Yeah, those are very difficult questions to answer. You know, for me, I think it's about the bloodline and the way you grew up, the way you were raised. That's kind of like what I feel is important in determining who is a status Indian and who is not. And I'd have to agree that you know, there are some people out there who have their card, and it's kind of funny that in one part of our area with the supplemental agreement, a whole bunch of people got added on, whereas in other areas, a whole bunch of people got taken off. And so I think that you know, there are people out there who are not proud to be part of our community. And I met you know, in this election campaign, I call people up and I say, you know, would you be able to support me in my bid for election as chief? And they're annoyed that I called them. They're annoyed that somebody has identified them as a Halapu member or whatever the case may be. And you know, we all need to be proud, every single one of us, of who we are and where we came from. You know, I know, and I have known since I was very young that, like, Flat Bay, for example, is a special place in our culture and history. I knew that. And I can't tell you why I knew it. I knew it from my family, from people talking and stories and things like that. So I guess, you know, in the United States, my American friends tell me that, you know, down there they look at 1/16 of a bloodline is sufficient to be part of an Indian band. But I don't have a clear answer on what that is. But I know that it's part of the people, it's part of how we lived, and it's our bloodlines. You know, I feel in my heart that this is the key categories. And in the whatever we do to sort out this enrollment mess, I think consideration there has to be given for people who are not proud and not part of our communities, but just want to take part or just want that card for the benefits that they can glean from that. That has to be addressed along with sorting out the enrollment process. And I can assure you, not everybody's going to be happy, but they'll be dealt with fairly. That's all I can say on that.
Thank you, Elder Calvin, for the questions. Self-determination, I've put that out there on Facebook before. I think I had a question on it. I said I'd have to investigate and find out that basically if you were going to be a member in name only or if you got the benefits. And I got the answer here today. So I also got the answer today that, okay, I've gone through the Indian Act. It's not a simple document, and there's many ways to misinterpret it and things like this. So get back to your question about being invited. I think Calvin had said there that basically if it's okay with the people at the meeting, and in most cases I really don't think there would be a problem with people at the meeting. We are family, whether we're in now or we're not in, like I say. I think that wouldn't be a problem at the time, but we, like Calvin said, we have to abide by the rules, and right now the rules are the Indian Act, and even some of that don't apply to us. There's special parts have been put in just for us, and people got to understand what we got as a contract. Nothing to do with a treaty or anything else. This AIP is a contract. And as far as people who we've had a lot of stuff told us that there's fake documentation, there's people in there that shouldn't be in there and things like that. And there's a need to have an investigation in that and take a look at some of the, and it could be, you know, whether we do them all or just the ones that we've been notified on. I think there should be a file that we should look at it, because like, if you shouldn't be there, you shouldn't be there, right? Like, it's like any other group that you have to meet a certain criteria to be part of. I think the criteria that is negotiated is the criteria that we can use. It's the one that we use to become part of it now. So and that's the initial one, not the one that the point system and there's even, I guess the point system, that even changed as it was being developed or evolved to accommodate some other people. So it needs to be looked at, definitely down the road, and that's where I stand on it and what I think about it. So, thank you.
Are you guys able to, or willing to, be able to accept a forensic audit from monies to paperwork to, just to add on to what we were just talking about? Like you said, it'd just be nice to know where we stand, what you guys are, your opinion on it, and see where we go from there. Thank you.
What I would like to see is to get someone that's really qualified, take a look, not only at the audits, but my biggest concern is where the money is actually going. And I think that if we can find that out, and then there's, you know, if everything is transparent and we find out where the money is actually going, especially in consultations and stuff like that, to law firms and that, and like, if we're putting out money, if we're spending money on law firms to fight for us or to get advice for whatever, we should be accessible to that information. And that's what I'm saying, it's not so much about the audit of the money and the money, like, you know, they got a good record of accountability to the government for the money in that. But what we want to know as members is, okay, who got the money? And I think we need to with transparency, if you put that out there shouldn't be any problem. But if you do some type of, have someone come in, take a look, find out the meat and potatoes of it, and if there's something looks out of whack, yeah, maybe we need to do something. But what we need to do is basically, we need to have transparency in our audits. Like, we go to AGA and we get a bunch of stuff, numbers is what it is. Now, I was always good at numbers, but like I say, when you don't see the details of what the numbers are telling you, like, we need to know who's involved, we need to know what companies are involved if we're paying out money to companies, and who those companies are. Like, is there conflict of interest within our council? Have someone got shares in some type of business that's always getting our business? I think we need to know that. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, not so much a forensic audit, but like, if there's necessary, if we see it's necessary to have a forensic audit, yeah, I'm sure, and if I got the will of council, if I'm elected, and the will of the people to do something, I'm not just going to waste $100,000 on a forensic audit if we don't need it. But if there's stuff there that kind of don't look right, but we need to find out where our money is going. We need to find out what companies, what law firms are getting our money. We need to know. And right now, we don't know that because it keeps coming up, and I know it's out there because it was leaked by one of the councillors on Facebook that the JFK report is out there, but we never ever saw it as people. And it might be something that will tell us that we could have fought the supplemental agreement. Nobody knows. Somebody knows. The council knows. And like I said, it was leaked on Facebook because the gentleman basically said that it wasn't worth anything, but it had to be worth something if we spent money on it, and came from a law firm out in BC. So anyway, that's where I stand with it.
In my military career, I managed and led large organizations with, in some cases, operating in capital budgets over $150 million. So I kind of know where to look when I'm looking at this. So I would have a handover of every single line item in the budget, and also I want the person who owns that line item sitting across the table from me, kind of looking me in the eye as I'm asking some pointy questions. So that's how I would proceed. I would go through the entire Halapu First Nation budget, and if at that time I found anything that was untoward or smelled of being illegal or whatever the case may be, or conflict of interest, then at that point in time I would order an investigation or a forensic audit to get to the full bottom of it. But you know, I wouldn't say going in that I would order a forensic audit. I would have to see some evidence from that kind of discussions, and would just put out there to any member of the public, if you have any evidence of wrongdoing or malfeasance in the band, and please bring it forward to whoever the person who's going to be elected the next chief, so they can get to the bottom of it. And yes, I do know that the band is very proud of its accounting practices and transparency and accountability there, and receives a very high rating every year, and that's great. But you know, an audit is only as good as the information that management provides, right? And when it comes to the people's money, I don't accept anything at face value. That's all I can tell you. I will dig down and find out what's beneath the surface, right? And then based on that, you know, I can assure the people that the matter will be investigated to the full extent. All right?
Joseph Bland again. So I have this question for our candidates, and if you can't give me the answer, maybe the other week will come up and tell me the answer. It's about the Indian Act. In order to be registered as a 61B Indian, what has to be in place? Is it true that my mother and my father both have to be registered as 61B Indians in order for me to become a 61B? Under the Indian Act. That's why I'm saying this band is different. Yeah. Because if I understand it correctly, there's nobody in the Halapu band who is qualified to be a 61B Indian. So if either one of you candidates can answer that, you answer it. If you can't, maybe the other week can. You know, I just thought it was a special, this band was a special band put in place and on a special condition.
And that's what it is. I think it's one parent.
Okay, here's the situation of what happened. Because Newfoundland wasn't included under the Indian Act in 1949 when we joined Confederation, the federal government decided that what it would do, it would negotiate a one-time founders list for Newfoundland outside of the Indian Act. So a negotiation took place whereby a criteria was developed and a criteria was agreed upon of what would constitute an Indian for the purposes of the creation of a band in Newfoundland, determined by a founders list. Immediately upon the minister's order in council, is the word I'm looking for, of creating that band with the people who had been identified as founding members, the Indian Act now applies to Newfoundland. Halapu is now under the Indian Act, because that's when it came in, as soon as that band was there. Under the Indian Act, if one parent has their status, that child, the child of that parent, will become a 6-2. It stops there. That child's children don't get registered. However, if both parents has their status, then that child becomes a 6-1, which means that if they don't marry, if it's a girl and she don't marry an Indian man, or if it's a man that don't marry an Indian woman, it means that when their children are born, their children will become 6-2s, but will not be eligible to go on after that unless they marries again into an Indian family. So just as an example, and ask me to repeat if I'm confusing you, anybody in this room, including myself, and I'll use myself, I have 3 children who were kicked out, but they are going to become 6-2s because I'm a 6-1. But my wife is not Indian, and so my children are 6-2s. My son Nelson, who lives in St. John's, who becomes a 6-2, his daughter will not get registered because he's a 6-2 and his wife is not Indian. However, now, supposing that was Cal and was married to an Indian woman, their children would become 6-1s. If that child married another Indian 6-1, their children would become 6-1. So the 6-1s continue on and on and on until you break that gap. Yes?
Can the rules of the Indian Act be changed by the government?
The rules of the Indian Act can be changed by the government, and right now, as we speak, those rules are under scrutinization. Because what is happening in Canada is, because of a commitment by the government, by Trudeau, they are looking at embarking upon self-to-self negotiations, which means that the Indian Act will, at some point in time, not tomorrow, but maybe within 5 years down the road, the Indian Act will be no longer in place and it will phase out. What will happen is then the bands will be given the authority to define their own membership. However, as I told you earlier, the government is not going to turn around, and we know this, the government is not going to turn around and say to a band, you can take anybody you want as your members and we'll give you pots of money to take care of it. That is not going to happen. Under the negotiations of self-government, what it looks like, and this is not definite, but what it looks like across this country that could conceivably happen is that they will work nation to nation with governments who have treaties, Indian governments who have treaties, Indian governments who have land claims, and what will happen is that the financial responsibilities of your membership will be transferred to the band, not something that will be paid for or looked out to by the federal government. So what it is really, it's really offloading. They're looking at, and they've been looking at this for hundreds of years, they're looking at getting away from their financial responsibility to Indian people and transferring that responsibility to the people themselves. So you would have to develop your own corporations, you would have to have land claim settlements, you would have treaty settlements, all of these things in order to generate revenue to look out to your membership. What happened was that you had approximately 9,000 people on the island of Newfoundland who had been documented, who had been researched as being Aboriginal people. That file was moved forward with these 9,000 people, got a little bit higher, 10, 12,000 people, and that file was being moved forward. And all of a sudden you had an influx of another 75 to 80,000 people who wanted their Indian status. The government of Canada and the negotiators did the right thing as far as I'm concerned. They said, hold on here a minute. We need to know where those people are coming from. Because just imagine if the government of Canada had to turn around and start paying health benefits and education benefits for 100,000 people on the island of Newfoundland. This is where the argument should have been. It doesn't matter if every Newfoundlander on the island is Indian. You have the same responsibility to those people that you have to every other person in Canada. However, in order to make sure that this is right and just, what we need is a definition of who's an Indian. I'm not standing here before you and telling you that there's not 100,000 Indians on the island of Newfoundland. I don't know that. What I'm telling you is that the criteria was muddled, the criteria was exaggerated, the criteria was broken, the criteria was used to favor some people, which opened the door to everybody else. That's why we're in the mess that we're in today. It could have been very, very easily fixed. And I might not be able to walk in public for the next 6 months after I say what I'm going to say to you here today.
Give it away.
Flat Bay's position was fourth generation rule for the founders list. That's what we argued. Fourth generation rule would not have been a problem. Every Indian tribe in Canada would have supported us. The Assembly of First Nations would have supported us. The Grand Council would have supported us. And guess what? The people that were out there that are now crying for their cards, who didn't want anything to do with the Indians, wouldn't have even bothered. So we wouldn't have to worry about them either. So that's where the mess was made. How can we clear it up? Somebody has to have the guts. I don't know if it's going to be you gentlemen, or if it's going, who it's going to be, but somebody have to have the guts to take this on and say, look, we need, forget about the point system, because point system doesn't make you an Indian. What we need to do is we need to go back to the drawing board and we have to define what is the definition of an Indian. And once we agree on that definition, we have to move that forward. And I will never change my position till the day that I die. The founders list for the Federation of Newfoundland Indians, which is now the Hollyboo, which for Newfoundland should have been fourth generation rule for the founders list. We didn't have anything to worry about. There was all kinds of documentation to substantiate our eligibility, and we wouldn't be in this mess we're in today. We know that the Indian population of the Bay St. George area, Colorado Valley, All Tree area, we know that there was a lot of intermarriages. So what we would have done is we would have had people that were brought back to the genealogy traits. The young generation today, believe it or not, are stronger than the ones that were identified in the 1921, 1935, 1945 census.
This question, I was born and raised in Flat Bay. My father is on the 1945 census as a French Indian. All my brothers and sisters get to keep their status. I received 0 points. My kids born and raised in Ontario received 9 points each. How could this happen?
I really can't comment or make an informed comment about an individual case, right? Because what I said about the enrollment process, I mean it, and that's the way I'm going to tackle this issue. People are there are many different complaints out there about the whole process. And I feel bad. Like I really am. It's shameful. It's a disgrace in some cases of the people that have been put out. People that have been grassroots people who have worked all their life, to support Aboriginal rights. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces and the RCMP kicked out, all of them. If they weren't living on the island, they had to serve their country somewhere else in Canada or the world, gone, right? A lot of elderly people, and I would suggest even, a lot of elderly people had trouble with their applications and stuff. Like if you didn't have access to somebody to help you or had an education to help you apply, that would have been a big challenge for some people. So there's a whole raft of different, very complex reasons for the mess that we're in today. And I can't stand up here and tell you of a clear path forward. It needs to be, a bunch of smart people have got to sit in a room now and think about this very hard and chart a way forward for our people that will rectify some of these glaring injustices and unite our people and bring them together. Okay, that's all I can say on it. Like I can't comment on any individual cases. I'm just talking in generalities about how I would tackle this issue. But this is definitely the top priority for me, and it would be the first thing that I would tackle.
I know 3 particular people that are all family, all lived in Aboriginal communities as stated by our agreement there. And in the latest appeal process, which they probably didn't have to do because they lived in the Aboriginal communities all their life, they appealed with the same documentation. Everything same, identical. So there was a mother, a daughter, and the mother's aunt. The aunt was recommended, the mother was denied. But the daughter was done by someone else, and she got in. So now the daughter's in, the mother's not in. So there's other cases where, and I can go on and on, there's other cases where an infant child, like under the age of 1, got more points than the parents. You know, how do a child under the age of 1 come home without their parents? It's just unbelievable. It's wrong, and we can stand here and talk about it all day. Enrollment was a problem because we never put the right people in place at the time. The supplemental agreement just made it even worse. The point system basically took genealogy out of play. Which technically I look at it, well, we're talking about white people in our band. That was the way to get in. Because I'm sure there's many people that come to Newfoundland via Port aux Basques and go to powwows and everything else that are not Aboriginal. But, like I say, we can talk about that. And like my partner said here, that there's a good chance that the courts will settle some of it. But it's going to take a united effort by everyone else to get everybody included. And the other thing about this whole thing that's going on, they're having a decision made in court, people are getting letters and everything else. Where is our help from Halapu to help these people who get a letter that don't understand what's going on? And there's many. And there's many with education don't understand it. But we have many members that don't have education. We have many members that never ever got a chance to be a part of this because they had no help. We have people, and I'm sure in this community and other communities, that just never got the help or just never went for the help. And we should have actually, as a band at the time, we should have actually searched them out. And we never, possibly. And these people didn't understand, like this AIP thing, it says that it was approved by 90%. So there's a big page that says 90% in favor. But it don't tell us basically that it was 90% of those who voted, which was less than a majority of people, members of the band at the time. And now we have a band, and we have a council that was elected, possibly by the 10,500 that were kicked out. You know, it just...
I was one of them.
Yeah.
Voted people in.
There you go. There's an example right here, and I'm sure there's more. Another one there. Just in this small group right now, we have three that elected our council, and now they're booted. It's so sad.
One of my major issues with Alapu right now is the economic development, which is my biggest thing that I want to see cleaned up. It's next to enrollment for me. When Chief Mitchell first got on board 3 years ago, we supported him. We helped to mentor him a little bit, as much as he would listen in the beginning. And at one point he came to me and he said that he wanted to help the powwow, get them some money. Now the powwow committee is a different committee from the Flat Bay Band, as you know. And I said, okay, well, we've been talking to Amira, myself and Calvin. Well, Calvin was physically talking to them at the time, and I was over email and that type thing. And so Elder Calvin had a discussion with Amira about their responsibility to Flat Bay and other communities for what they're doing, cutting down our trees and our berry patches and stuff like that. And they knew and they agreed that they had to have a community responsibility to us by way of contribution, cash contribution. So I said to Chief Mitchell, I said, well, I'm in the middle right now of working with Emera my idea is to have him fund the powwows, plural. I said, even Con River and the Powwow Cultural Revival Committee. I said to Emera, what a good idea that would be for you to show that while you're cutting down our trees, you're working in harmony with the bands and with the lands of the communities. So I made a good case to Emera, and I told Chief Mitchell about this. And so he said, I'd like to help with that. I said, okay. So I said, it'd be good for you if you can get this done, and it'll be a good little bonus for you just being in rain. So I asked Emera in proposal form for $160,000. $160,000. And my idea was to give half of it to the Cultural Revival Committee and half of it to Con River, because they were the two powwows on the island of Newfoundland. And by contributing to them, you're contributing to everybody, because as Chief Mitchell or anybody would say, our powwow is everybody's powwow. He said, I've been talking to Emera on the phone now, and I know that $160,000 is way too much to ask for. And I think that we should ask take Con River out of it. I said, well, if you've been talking to them on the phone and that's what you gathered, then okay, you can edit the letter. He edited the letter to make it to be $75,000 for the powwow committee. It was sent in, they got $75,000. They gave the powwow committee $7,000, and they kept the rest. We don't want to be stabbed in the back, and we're not putting up with it. And I won't be putting up with it on behalf of the people. I can give many, many cases. But my thing with economic development is, Halapu, if you're aware, already gets a budget for economic development, a core budget from INAC, okay? Flat Bay doesn't get a core budget for anything. Port-au-Port doesn't get a core budget for anything. Indian Head doesn't get a core budget for anything. So they're already getting a budget to develop economic development initiatives in order to sustain Halapu or increase their capacity. So Emera now, since the relationship has been developed, they're not giving them $160,000 or $75,000. I know that it's about $300,000, close to it, every year. Meanwhile, Emera is in our communities. Drillers Road, Stewart went down to pick berries to take a family there over the summer. All the berries gone. Berries are ancient. They're here since land formed. They sustain our people. The value of a blueberry patch, for example, is really significant. My point is that Halapu is landless. When trees are cut down or oil is developed or anything like that, it's not affecting a landless band. Halapu already has a core budget for economic development. And how dare they get $300,000 a year from one, that's only one partner, and not share it with the communities who are being affected.
The band has to have like a long-term economic development plan. And it's a plan that has to benefit all of the people, or as much as you can say all of the people. She talked about, the Flat Bay Powwow, which is an activity that benefits a lot of the people in the Con River Powwow as well. So, I've been asking since I started this election campaign to see where's our long-term economic development plan. Like, how are we moving forward? What are the objectives along the way and the milestones and stuff like that? And how is it benefiting the people? So all I kind of get is bits and pieces of, the other day I was down to Benoit's Cove. I went down to visit the fish plant because I wanted to see with my own eyes what was the deal there with the redfish quotas and the berry group. And, it's all under construction. It's going ahead. I'm not sure if there was a whole lot of consultation done with the people. I don't understand what's in it for the Halapu First Nation and what we're going to get out of it exactly. As far as I can tell, there's a handful of jobs going to be down there, and people that are going to take part in this fishery are going to have to own a $1.5 million boat in order to be able to fish the redfish. So this is kind of like just one area of the difficulty that I have with economic development in Hollywood right now. It's not a concentrated, straightforward plan that the people can see down the road where we're going, how we're going to get there, and how is it going to benefit us. Right? So this is lacking. I'm a believer, I'm a firm believer in decentralizing like resources to those key catchment areas where most of the people live in our First Nation. So you know, like everything's now seems to be concentrated like in Corner Brook. And all the economic development plans I heard about was we're going to establish urban reserves and stuff in Corner Brook. I'm not for that. I'm for diversifying and decentralizing some economic development activities to our key areas, like Bay St. George being one, Corner Brook is another one, and probably Central would be the third one. So if you're talking about urban reserves and economic development and so on. And economic development is an important part of the future. It's a very important part of the future because it's going to lay the foundation for all of the things that are going to unite us and bring us forward to protect our First Nation and the young people and generations to come. Right, we need that solid base of resources to defend ourselves because we're going to be, if I get elected chief, I expect I'll be in court a few times. So we need that economic base to defend ourselves and to unite our people, to spend on cultural events. This is a big unifying factor that we have to take into account. So to make a long story short, I'm about economic development. I understand its importance. But I do firmly believe that it's economic development for all of the people, not just some of the people, right? It's for all of us, and all of us should benefit from it.
Our culture has grown, has moved light years ahead of this band. And it's because of the grassroots people. It's not because of Halipu. Like I say, back in 1982, when I became part of this movement, we went to AGAs and we had a little bit of smudging and a prayer said in English, a Mi'kmaq prayer said in English, and that was it. And later on we had some drummers and some dancers come out of this area and Grand Falls, especially I know in Central area, and then Corner Brook, and they might have all evolved around the same time or just after each other. But it was brought to us by the grassroots people, and all we need to do as a band is support them. Give them financial support, moral support. Our people out there, grassroots people, will take that and move. They're so far ahead now than the band itself, it's unbelievable. It's just been growing. It's awesome. The powwow here, the gatherings in each community now that have grown in the past couple of years, just unbelievable. Economic development. We got this book here that was the AIP, the Agreement in Principle, and there's a couple of bullets there on one page. Says access to federal programs. It says post-secondary student support. Great. What we got now is great. The people that's leading the education stuff have done a wonderful job. We still mightn't get everybody in that we want to, but the program, with the money they got, they're doing a great job. Band support funding. Initially when we got this book, or initially when we talked about the regime 2002, when they talked about band support, it wasn't one band. It was every band. It was the 9 bands that was part of the Federation, plus it might have been even Bartlett's Harbour who was kicked out of it. And that's it. And it was all about bands. Community Economic Development Organization. Well, when I saw community there, I was thinking each community, not one community. I know we're a community as people, but I thought this was going to be Flat Bay, Steamville Crossing, communities. And I know we got much more communities than they say 67 communities. We got more communities than 67 that's out there anyway. It says community support services. And again, is the community one community or is it all our communities? Community economic opportunities. And when we talk about that, I'm talking about, like we talk about the urban reserve. The urban reserve for me would be a last resort. We need to give all our communities an opportunity to become economically independent. And it's not going to come overnight. There got to be a plan, and somebody got to be first, somebody got to be last. But rather than have urban reserve, I would rather see, like Clyde mentioned, basically a commercial area can be in Stephenville, commercial area in Cornerbrook that services that area, commercial area in Central. There's nothing wrong with having a commercial area in Burgeo. Burgeo was one time the richest community in Newfoundland. And how about down Northern Peninsula? We have brothers and sisters down there. Let's put a commercial area down there. I know there may be restrictions with the Indian Act now that will restrict some of that. But if there's a will to change and a will from government to have us become economically independent and run our own show, why not? Can they just give us the freedom to do that? And with that, we need land. And I also say that the government of Newfoundland owes us something. And maybe it's the land that we can get and use for our commercial areas. And like I said before, somebody got to be first, somebody got to be last. So you start somewhere and use that economic base, the money coming in to promote another economic base in each community. And I honestly think that can work and work well. And as far as economic development, I think that's the way to go. And like I say, they talk about the urban reserve. Like I say, there's been issues out there about where it should go, population here, population there. It would be a last resort, and then I would think the decision would be from the people based on basically feasibility in one case. And like I say, if we have an urban reserve in Cornerbrook, that's great for Cornerbrook, but everybody else got to travel to Cornerbrook to benefit. And that's the way it should be. If you're in close to, whether it's Stephenville, and everybody in Bay St. George got to drive half hour, 45 minutes to reap the benefit, that's okay. But I think it should be spread out and spread around, and everybody have an opportunity for economic development. And like I said, back to the culture and what's happening here with Emira, or whatever her name is, that coming in and destroying our country and giving us money, and then where do it go? It should go back to the communities. Not one community or put it aside and save it for urban reserve or anything else. We need to be independent, and it all got to do with self-determination too, because like some of the self-determination that we will make as a band, we will have to negotiate more money, but if we're economically independent, we can use that money to help become self-determinate. We can say, okay, we can develop this and have our money, so we can have 100,000 if they meet the criteria. You know, we got to be thinking outside the box, and we got to have a 5-year plan or 10-year plan, but we got to have a plan. And right now, don't seem to be. And if we do have a plan, the people got to be part of it.
Are you open to looking at an appropriate way to give cash contributions to all the band communities through the economic development? Just a yes or no?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
And I just want to add to that, like, I'm not the kind of person that tries to break what's already working.
Yes.
And I see young progressive chiefs out there doing good stuff in their communities and taking care of their people, and I will reinforce that success.
Thank you. Because we know that economic development cash contributions are non-discretionary, a word I took from you, Clyde, from today, they're non-discretionary. Would you, even though the Northern Peninsula didn't get in as membership, and maybe they never will, hopefully they will, but let's say they never will, would you be willing to share some of that cash contribution with the Northern Peninsula? Let's say Emera is cutting in the Northern Peninsula.
I'm willing to. I'll put my neck on the line. I'm willing to share with any that our members live there in the community, whether it is 20, 300 or whatever. Like I said before, share the wealth. It's got to be about the people, and whether it's $200, 200,000, depending on the number. Yeah, I'm willing to share.
I would like to know what your thoughts are individually on the hiring of non-Aboriginal people. Our band has hired people 3 or 4 times in the past that weren't our own members, and 1 or 2 weren't even native, but that was after we turned over every stone. And sometimes it may be the case that somebody who's not in our membership is the best person for the position. But as many of you know, I was loud about the people of the Don doing it, and then right after, on the heels of that kerfuffle, Alapu did it with the hiring of, his name I forget, but their economic development officer. And the problem as well is that I knew that they didn't turn over every stone, because, and I'll just speak to Alapu at this point because this is not about people of the Don, because I had applicants who had masters of business, who were our members, who had credentials better than the person hired, who applied for that position, and they never even got an interview.
You know, hiring of non-Aboriginal people for our jobs, I guess I could say, would, in my view, should only be the last resort, like a last resort. Like if you can't find anybody that has the qualifications, then you know you got to get the job done, so you have to find somebody. But I just want to say that you know it's really important to try to keep all those young people that were spending so much money on education, like in our own communities, and give them jobs here. That's really important, because you know in a lot of ways we're educating them, and they're leaving the province to go find work somewhere else. And you know, in any agreement that we have with any company, like for corporate agreements, labor agreements for large companies, you know, there needs to be a piece in there about employment and jobs for our people, right? We have to make sure that is negotiated, and that's a big piece of any negotiation that we have with larger companies that are developing industrial activity in our areas. And the last thing I'd say is that, you know, I think that for hiring practices, or to make sure you've got a transparent kind of hiring practice, is to have hiring boards. Is, you know, people apply for the job, and they come and their application is assessed before a board to ensure transparency, so that you know you're not hiring all your family, or there's a perception of bias on behalf of the leadership. So I'm big on hiring boards, because I think, and even to bring in non-biased people or people from outside your organization to sit on these boards, because I personally have sat on a number of hiring boards myself. So I think that those are a couple of ways that we can do it. But bottom line is, shouldn't hire anybody, in my view. You know, that's not from our band unless it's a last resort. In some cases, it may be a last resort.
We need independent people to be doing the hiring. I think we should have an independent committee that we can involve some members at large from you people or whatever to do, make a selection. Like stated earlier, you should turn over every stone to find someone in your own membership, because I can guarantee you we got some capable people in our membership. And to even think about going outside without going to those people is just ludicrous, basically. We got people within our membership to do pretty well any job. And I think that we need the independence, and I had suggested when I worked as an outreach worker and Aboriginal Client Relations Officer that when we were doing it, we had selection board to select students. I had suggested at that time that instead of sending off a name on an application, we send off a number. And the people who were putting the applications together, like myself and the late Bernie Hanlon from Central, would have the list of the applications, put your number in related to each one, have them sent to the board, have the board decide who they hired. If they hired number 2, come back, the name would be there. Or would take away anything that would say, well, you hired your sister or your brother or anything else. And that, you know, I know you can't do it in the hiring process, but in the education process there was a time you could do something like that. So yeah, and that's to take away the perception, like Clyde said. Even to take away that is a big thing, right? Because people aren't going to say, oh, I hired him because of this is who he knows or whatever. I think there definitely should be something done, and if elected and with the will of council and that, I would suggest that they put an independent hiring committee in place and to involve public, not the members at large, some member at large to be part of it.
Just a suggestion, but one thing we do here in Flat Bay is we have a hiring committee, but and on that committee is we have one band council officer. It changes all the time, and then we have one person involved, like it could be the coordinator, the program, or the partner, or whatever. And then the third person is anybody external from the community at any given time. And it doesn't matter if they have experience or not, because we do an interview kit to orientate them what to do. And the fourth thing that we do is we have a scrutinizer who sits in the meeting, does not speak, and just takes notes to make sure that it was done unbiased and that they followed all the procedures, because we often have different eligibilities and stuff like that. So it's just a suggestion. I just promised someone that I would ask this question, and I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. But it's an honest question, because it's a thought process with everybody. So you both seem to have faith in each other as a candidate. And you both seem to have an issue with the current leadership. Am I correct? Okay. How do you feel about the issue of you splitting the votes by both of you running in this area? So a lot of people have worries there, because have either of you ever thought about, you know, coming together and then maybe one moving back, or do you have any faith on the voters on how that can be overcome? But it is a worry amongst the people about both of you splitting the votes here, if that's the case, that the current leadership shouldn't be in place.
Yeah, this is a question that you know, is raised quite often, or has been raised in the past couple of weeks. And to kind of explain it to you, as I said at the beginning, when the people asked me to run for chief, I didn't know this man, you know, very well. if at all. And I only met him since we started on the election campaign. And I respect him. I respect all the hard work that he's done in the Aboriginal community over the years. But in my case, like I made a commitment to my people, the people who asked me to run for chief, to do just that. And I felt the first time I met Hayward, I apologized to him because I knew that this potentially could be an issue. But I promised the people I would run, and I'm in it to win the election. I'm not taking I'm not taking a back seat. I'm telling you straight up. I think I have the qualifications and the background and the training to be an effective chief, particularly in this time in our history. We've gone through like a really messy birth of our nation. Now it's what comes next, and I believe in my mind that what comes next is that you have to have a chief who has some experience in the bigger issues, because there's going to be a lot of bigger issues. And I spent most of my life as a warrior. So I present myself not only as a warrior chief, but also as a man who has a good bit of experience in dealing with Ottawa at the higher levels, at ministers' levels, and managing large, complex, diverse organizations. So that's all I can say. I'm sorry that potentially it could turn out this way. I do not agree with Chief Mitchell on many things, and I wish he was here today, because I could say that if you're the chief, you got to answer the hard questions. If you're the leader and the boss, you have to be there to answer the hard questions from the people. That's what leadership is all about. And any opportunity to meet with the people is a golden opportunity in my view. So that's where I stand on it. I apologize to anybody who this may affect. I'm not sure how this will turn out, but I'm in it to win and serve my people.
When I first spoke to Clyde, I told him there was a possibility, and I've said it out there, that we could hurt each other here, and Mitchell could get in the back door. But I also told him it was our democratic right to run, and the people will make a decision, and hopefully at the end of the day we have a good leader. And like I said, I feel that I've had the experience. I'm going to use like any legal advice I can get, and I'm going to have the best once elected with I guess our council to lead us. Negotiations. Some people says I may have no negotiation skills, but when I took 4 years off council of Stephenville Crossing to negotiate a contract for the employees. The employees were looking to become union. They still got that contract today. That's reviewed every 4 years. They're happier with it than they would have been in a union. So I think I do have some credentials as a negotiator, but I won't be negotiating alone. I will be negotiating basically with someone from our council with us, some of our elder advisors, and we're definitely going to have an elder advisory if I'm elected, and we will have the best legal help that we can get when we sit down and negotiate anything, and that's just the way it is. As far as us, like I say, I've only spoken to the man 3 times. We're gradually becoming better friends. We're sharing information, and if he becomes chief, I'll help him out any way I can, and I'm sure if I becomes chief, I'll be looking for him for help too. So that's just the way it is, and it's going to be up to the Creator at the end of the day who gets in. Hopefully to be honest with you, hopefully is one of us.
We'd be in a good situation with either of these gentlemen, to be honest with you. But in any case, thank you for running and thank you for visiting our community and sharing yourselves with us.